Hello, everyone, and welcome to Venturing Abroad. My name is Erica. I'm part of the communications team here at Daphne. And today we are so happy to welcome Luben Pampoulov as our guest. Luben is from Austria. He's a former professional tennis player turned Silicon Valley investor who led early investments in Spotify, Dropbox, Lyft, Coursera, and now he's based here in Paris. We're so eager, Luben, to learn from your transatlantic experience in entrepreneurship and venture capital. So, Luben, thank you so much for joining us and welcome to Venturing Abroad.
Thank you so much for having me.
We're also joined by our co-host, Chris, one of our investors here at Daphne. Chris, I know you're an excellent football player, but I'm curious, how's your tennis game?
It's extremely weak. I don't think we had one good Brazilian tennis player, Gustavo Kirten, but it's not in the genes, I guess.
Well, actually, now you have the next up-and-coming Brazilian tennis player who might be getting to the top.
And
with Fonseca.
Yeah, Fonseca is and he's from Rio as well. So let's see.
Luben, your journey is nothing short of unique. Can you take us back to when you made your way from Austria to California? You were playing tennis at UCLA, captain of the team that went on to win the NCAA championship. You were the number one player in 2005. Was it difficult for you to go from Austria to LA? What was your experience like adapting to a new country, new culture?
Yeah, sure. And maybe I'll go a step back even because I'm actually born and raised in Bulgaria. My parents are Bulgarian, so native Bulgarian. And then at age 10, I went to Austria with my dad, partly also because of tennis. Both my parents were tennis players, so I grew up in a tennis family. By the time I was able to walk, I had already a racket in my hand. So if I look at my life until age 18, 19, 20, it was all about tennis. And, school was almost secondary. I mean, what I'm really grateful about my parents is they always told me, you have to do school and you have to get your grades and you have to, get fully educated. So it's in retrospect, obviously, so grateful because I wouldn't be sitting here if that wouldn't have happened. But again, it was all about tennis, and I was a good junior player. I ended up playing all the Grand Slam tournaments when I was a junior, and then made the switch into professional tennis for 2-3 years. Was kind of playing those middle level tournaments called challengers. So tried to get it to the big stages, but at some point I got the opportunity to get a college degree and basically go and get free education because of tennis. Because in the US you have the model of college sports where if you're good enough, you get a full scholarship and you get to go to some of these great universities, and that was the case with me. I got an opportunity to go to UCLA in Los Angeles, which I had already heard amazing things about. The moment I went there, stepped foot on the ground, and I saw the campus, I fell in love, and I decided, let's do this. Let's get a degree. I always had a little bit of interest in economics and finance, so I wanted to do that, and I kept my future open whether I will go back to tennis after I'm done or not. And so one thing led to the next. I've played for UCLA. It was an amazing time also because we were so successful with the team. And I studied finance and economics, and then I got the opportunity to do an internship in Silicon Valley with an investment bank, which I took. And that's how I basically moved to Silicon Valley in the first place and stayed there afterwards.
Awesome. And a question, because for me it was also a decision on leaving sports and entering the industry. Was it a specific moment where you say, okay, I'm giving up on tennis, or was it a process for you?
I wouldn't say it was a specific moment, but it's a series of things that basically take you in a certain direction. And I felt, I like the direction I'm going into. I never regretted not going back to tennis. So even today, I mean, I'm happy that in some extent I'm involved with the sport, and I love watching tennis and I love being close to a lot of the players. But I don't regret not going back to play after college. Really liked, this new world for me, which was, investing, and I had to basically start at zero vis-a-vis a lot of other people who were my age and just joined, that firm that I was working at. I felt I was probably a year or two behind just because I haven't had the experience in high school, or other experiences that many others have had already. But again, it was one thing leading to the next, and I enjoyed it, and I still enjoy it today.
Do you feel that your experience as a player, given that you were traveling around, helps you as an investor when making international deals and working with people from different parts of the world?
Certainly, it has given me a lot of rich background in knowing different cultures, in knowing different places. But I think the more important part for athletes when they come into the business world is actually elements like discipline, hard work, practice, doing the job, all these little things that are so critical, that you do learn as a professional athlete. And these are elements that I think are so important that athletes typically bring with them. But then again, you have to make up on other things, and there's a big gap, and you have to read a lot of books. You have to kind of educate yourself and get up to speed. I mean, I unfortunately for me, when I was playing tennis, I wasn't reading as many books as I wish now I did. But then when I started working, because I knew I was so far behind and I needed to learn so much about investing and principles and just get up to speed, I started reading a lot of books, which helped me then also shape my opinion, shape my personality, shape my views of what to look at when we're, talking to companies, talking to founders, what makes a good investment. Strategies, long term versus short term. So all of that I had to basically catch up on vis-a-vis peers, and yeah, so there's positives and negatives.
And what's one of the books that you read during this time that you found particularly insightful?
There's different books, a few that stand out. One Up on Wall Street from Peter Lynch. I mean, all the books about, Warren Buffett, or An Intelligent Investor. I mean, it's like the Bible of investing almost. So there's many different books that I've read, that come to mind. I think more recently, one book I specifically like is Ray Dalio's book on, not the newest one, but the one I think from 4 or 5 years ago, where he talks about the history of different empires and how it keeps on repeating itself every 100 years or so, which is very interesting now because you're looking at the global dynamics between the U.S., China, and how some of those elements start to play out. So yeah, I mean, I don't think I don't have one specific book in mind, but there's many great books.
Awesome. And then coming back from the transition from sport to investment, after you got into banking, what was the next move that then drew you to VC, and what made you stick to VC?
Yeah, so I was working at a investment bank in San Francisco, and actually working with my currently two partners, Michael Mo and Deborah Quazzo, who were the founders of that bank. And basically, they sold it just around 2008 when the financial crisis happened. And that led to us then ultimately launching GSV in around 2011. And yeah, with GSV, we've been in the early days for kind of a generalist approach, and then more recently, since 2016, has really evolved to be an EdTech focused approach, education technology, which has been very close to my partners Deborah and Michael's hearts for decades, because they had already um, done so much work around education. And yeah, that's how basically we became an edtech focused VC. And it was really around 2015, 16 when there was critical mass of startups where you can actually start to have a dedicated fund, because the segment was relatively small until recently. It is still relatively small, but it's growing. Just as a reference, education is a 7 trillion industry, similar size to healthcare, but it is so underpenetrated when it comes to digital um, tools, learning, and other things. And now, obviously, with AI, you're starting to see very fast adoption, and it's creating a lot of new opportunities that entrepreneurs can build upon. And yeah, I think it's quite exciting when looking at what education can do to society, to individuals, and just how big the opportunity is. It's all very compelling.
Knowing that we'll dig deeper into education and the opportunities later on. But I had a question because in hindsight, 2010 feels a great time to start a VC fund in Silicon Valley. But I'm pretty sure at the moment was not the best macroeconomic environment, and launching a first fund is never easy. So how was the process of starting GSV? What were some challenges in raising the first fund, and how was the global experience of Silicon Valley in that time?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's funny when you look at the last 20, 30 years, there's certain waves that happen. And, there was the 2001, 2003, 4 wave of the dot-com bubble. And out of that, you started to have all the Web 1 or Web 2.0 kind of platforms that evolved. Then you got the financial crisis in 2008. And out of that, you had mobile and cloud computing evolve, and a lot of big winners being created in those years. Arguably the last 2, 3 years, you had a mix of post-COVID kind of adjustment in the economic landscape, but also now with the impact of AI and what that has created, and probably this being the latest wave that will also create some amazing businesses for the next 10, 20, 30 years. So again, it's kind of cycles, and that was the cycle of that time when we started GSV. Obviously, it's never easy to raise a first fund, but we found an opportunity at the time. Actually, it was the very early innings of the secondary market, where some companies were at a very large scale and still private. The biggest example being Facebook. And very few investors had access to Facebook because all the investors are typically on the public side, and then only a handful of venture firms had invested in Facebook. But then you had already a lot of employees, former employees, early investors who were looking for liquidity. So that was kind of the early innings where you started to see the secondary marketplaces for secondary shares to be traded before the company is even public. Obviously, today it's a very big market, and I forgot what the number is, like something like 3,000 unicorns or companies that were valued at $1 billion or above. So obviously, these markets have grown and matured quite a bit since then. But that was at the time, one of the opportunities that we also leveraged.
From there, GSV has grown a lot. You're now based in Paris. When did you make the switch from the US to Europe, and what brought you back to Europe?
Yeah, so it was more on a personal basis because I'm from Europe and I really loved my time in the US, and I still enjoy and love being in the US every time I go back. So it also always feels like a second home to me. But I just felt I personally wanted to live in Europe. And at the time, it was not very obvious to be in Paris. And we're talking about 12 years ago or so. It was not as obvious, to come to Paris because London was the one big hub for venture capital and innovation. Uh, but I think now, when you look at Paris and what's happened, and obviously you guys are in the middle of it, it's become quite an attractive place to be building, raising, growing. I think there's definitely a lot of talent here, great universities. And what, 10 years ago, if you were a successful founder based in France or Paris, you probably raise a seed round, and then by the time you're Series A, you're already moving to the US. I think that is no longer the case. I think there's enough capital, there's a big enough ecosystem, and even Silicon Valley investors deploying capital in Europe and Paris. So I think it's evolved. And by the way, GSV stands for Global Silicon Valley. So when our thought process was when we started GSV, Silicon Valley is no longer a physical space between San Francisco and San Diego. It's a global mindset that's spreading around across the world. And so you have these different innovation hubs and centers. And clearly, Paris has become one of those.
Have you noticed a difference in the investment thesis between France versus the US?
I think it's depending on which sector, because different sectors have, I think, different approaches. I can speak to EdTech, and EdTech probably is somewhat different than other sectors because in EdTech, you're often tied to the local education system. So what we've seen in Europe, whether you're in Germany, France, Spain, a lot of the EdTech startups start within the local market, then they expand maybe within the same language market, and then if they keep on succeeding, then they go global. In other areas, you might have much more cases and examples where from day one you're building to be a global player, whether that's in B2C or B2B. So I think it depends really on the sector. I think one of the advantages that obviously Silicon Valley and the US has, it's a big enough market for somebody to be building for the US. But the other advantage is, the English language is the number one language in the world. So if you're building something in English for the US, you're essentially also building for the world. So that's an advantage there. And again, going back to education, we've only had a handful of markets that are big enough to create multi-billion-dollar companies within their own markets. And those are the US, China, which went through a pretty rough time because of some political changes, and then India, which has been a market that we've been investing quite a lot. In Europe, we found only a handful of companies that have been able to basically from day one grow and be global. And there's been some very successful cases. One of them we were fortunate to invest in, called Photomath. But that has been one key difference between companies starting in Europe and starting in the US, specifically to EdTech.
It's also very interesting because you're one of the few pure global players where you actively allocate across continents. And how different it is. What are some challenges and learnings on evaluating different cultures of entrepreneurs? Because they communicate differently, they sell differently. The standards of success across cultures is different. So what are some key insights you got from that experience?
Absolutely. And India being a great example of that, because you have many different elements on a cultural basis. First of all, in India, the willingness to spend for education is much higher than in most other places around the world. Probably India and China would put on the same kind of level where families are spending a lot of money for their children's education. And why is that? Because, first of all, you have a massive population. You have a large part of the population that's essentially coming to the middle class or trying to go from the middle class into being more wealthy. And there is only so much infrastructure available for a set amount of the population to be supported. So the opportunity there is online education democratizes access and opens up access to a lot more people. And again, culturally, the willingness to spend by parents is so much higher than in Europe or in the US. Arguably in Europe, in places like France, you have a fairly good public education system where you don't have as many problems that maybe parents feel like they need to spend extra on their children's education. So you have to look at what is the culture, what is the local setup, politically, structurally, societal, and understand, what is the incentive for the user to spend money. What, how large can this become? How disruptive can it be? One of the lenses we're looking at when we make investments is through the lens of return on education, and we call it ROE. And what we mean by that is, partnering and finding entrepreneurs who can create products that democratize access to high quality education, that lowers the cost compared to status quo and what's available, and ultimately leads to strong outcomes for the individual, for a company, and for society. And so, that lens we can apply to regardless of which geography we're in. But to your point, yes, there are some very, big differences in whether you're investing in the US, in France, in India, or in China.
Have you seen a difference in the entrepreneurs with their readiness or will to scale as fast as possible?
Definitely. I think just the fact that you've got, especially now with AI, the fact that you've got so many examples of companies going from zero to hundreds of millions of revenue in 1 to 3 years. I mean, the most recent example, I believe, was Coursera going with like 15 employees from 0 to 100 within a year. And again, there's multiple examples of those cases. I think that is something that shows to entrepreneurs or aspiring entrepreneurs that they can build something. I mean, you have all the tools, you have the technology. AI is enabling you to be very lean. And if you have a good idea and you build smart and you differentiate and you create an amazing product, you have that opportunity. And so I think that's also shown up with just a number of startups that you've seen in different places around the world. Again, the number of cases where companies are very fast growing, creating their own markets or disrupting some of the old age companies. So that is happening. It's happening across the world.
In which senses do you think the US and US entrepreneurs are still the best at?
I think there is a few elements that you will see more often in the US than elsewhere. So I think just the willingness to build, scale, run fast, and not being afraid of failing is something that you probably don't see as much or as regularly in Europe yet. Maybe that will change. It certainly has been changing, and I think it will change in the future. But that is one thing that continues to differentiate somebody building a startup out of Silicon Valley versus somebody building in Berlin or you name it, some other place. Other than that, I think because everything now is global and obviously AI is creating these new sets of opportunities, it's very easy replicable what is successful in Silicon Valley and to do that in other places. I mean, DeepSeek was a great example of that when they took a new approach to something that is brand new that OpenAI did, out of Silicon Valley, and they did it better with, relatively less compute cost. Sorry, relatively less cost spent, and they achieved similar results. Which doesn't mean they've obviously they're going to be superior. I mean, that's an open game, and we're in the very early innings, and but it's just amazing to see what you're starting to see, coming in terms of innovation from China, from Europe, from different places around the world.
With you guys trying to build a global fund, and with these new dynamics in the market with younger and younger entrepreneurs being able to have such explosive results, how do you see the international coverage game playing in the next years? Do you feel you will have to have hyper localized presence? Do you feel that it's more important to build a global brand and centralize the platform in a country? How do you see that for both GSV and for the market into addressing this global market in AI?
Yeah, it's a bit challenging question, but I think ultimately it's where we feel comfortable that we have the knowledge and we understand the dynamics. It's a little bit like being a tennis player and you're good at serve and volley, so you want to leverage that. But then if you need to adjust and you need to start to have a different approach, obviously you need to be comfortable and you have to really have done your due diligence. So I think, we will probably remain very heavy on the US, opportunistically have investments in Europe, because again, I think there is strong talent and we're starting to see some examples of companies that can scale globally. India continues to be just very interesting just from the sheer macro trends. And we have a few portfolio companies that have done really well. And yeah, I mean, again, I think I won't be surprised if some new leaders emerge from places like Brazil or somewhere in Africa or the Middle East. I think yeah, I mean, trends are converging and AI again is enabling for entrepreneurs to build things that scale very fast.
Where do you see European EdTech in the next 5 years?
I hope it's at 10x from here, but it's a hard question. Again, I think the challenge so far has been 90% of the startups that we've seen in Europe have been mainly focusing on their local markets, and I mean, I understand why, because you have language barriers, cultural barriers. But my hope is that there will be more examples of, um, Photomath or, Domestika, which is a Spanish US company that has a very global footprint. Um, you know, Minecraft was actually another good example that is really gamified education, also out of Europe. So I think there's going to be more players out of Europe. Just the question on how fast and how many, it's an open question that I it's hard to answer that right now.
With education being so also attached with governmental goals and kind of like basic rights of humans, and how do you see the challenge between the impact and monetization and creating a profitable business? How do you assess the impact versus profitability of businesses in education?
Yeah, it's a very good question, and I think what's positive about being an investor in education is you're by nature you're automatically also an impact investor, just because you're looking through the lens. You want positive impact for the learner, for the company, for society. So it goes hand in hand. The political question, yes, it's obviously it can kill businesses. It can also create businesses and can create sectors. It's interesting in the moment in the US, actually, there is a big trend around ESAs, which is essentially giving parents funds to spend on their own choice for their children's education. And when you look at some of the historical outcomes in the US vis-a-vis other countries around the world, it's been actually declining. There's this set of PISA scores which tracks math, science, and reading, and those have been consistently declining for US students. Then you look at the cost of education for going to college has been skyrocketing. It's actually been growing faster um, than debt, than personal debt in the US, and it's currently a 1.8 trillion student debt. Meanwhile, the outcomes of those students, or sorry, the students going through a 4-year degree, they then try to get into the workforce and they realize what they just studied is become irrelevant because the technology has changed, the requirements have changed. And so how do you solve for that? And I think the government can set policies in place, which to some extent now they're doing in the US, where you give more freedom and power to the parents to choose, what type of education they can give. You're also starting to see more entrepreneurial approaches from high quality teachers to be building their micro schools, where essentially also the teacher has a stake in those micro schools and get essentially like stock options if those schools become popular. So there's some, again, interesting trends that we're seeing. We're looking at some investments in that space, and um, ultimately, whenever you have structural challenges and problems, it's innovation that solves them. And so being able to back smart entrepreneurs with big visions who go after those problems is something we are really excited about.
Of course, technology and mobile and the internet has brought a lot of access to a lot of people to information and knowledge, which is very good. I think it has democratized the access to knowledge at an insane pace. But at the same time, it comes with some challenges for society, like addiction, decrease in attention span, and so on. Especially now with AI and the youth being such a high adopter of ChatGPT. And then at the same time, you have Macron has spoken recently about maybe blocking the access to social media for people under 15. The Swedish government is trying to block access to computers for under 13 students. How do you see the mix and the future of software and technology in education in a way that you maximize the positives without bringing some of the negatives?
Yeah, that is a very important part, especially when we're looking at the younger ages, so kids in primary school, middle school. It is so important to have high quality teachers present face to face, teaching students how to use the technology. It's also obviously important to have the parents very involved with the children, because to your point, there's a big risk. Social media, TikTok, I mean, it's fun, but there is also a very bad side of that. And at those young ages, you're very easily, kids are very easily manipulative. And how do you make sure that they don't fall into those traps and they stay the right course? That is so important. And therefore, while online education is definitely the future for anyone in the workforce, arguably also most people doing higher education will probably be a blend between online and in person. But then as you go younger, I think specifically middle school and primary school, and obviously before that, it is so important that actually technology empowers the teacher and the educator, and for them to be teaching how to work with technology for the kids and not letting the kids um, be taken into a bad direction by social media and by all these new tools that are now out there, easily accessible.
Yeah, and using it more as a tool and aid than as a distraction.
Exactly, yeah.
What is one trend in EdTech that you're really bullish about and bullish on, and what is one trend that you're kind of like not so excited or not as excited as the market?
I think multimodality is creating some really interesting things for the future. What Google did with Notebook LM is the first example of that, where what used to be something that you would spend 10 minutes or half an hour reading is now delivered to you in a podcast mode. And it's now interactive in the latest version. So you've gone from text to voice. I think there's going to be a lot of interesting changes for education in the future between video, voice, and text. And, I start to think, what is reading going to be in 50 years from now? Are we going to be reading at all? Is it all going to be listening mode? Do we need to write? Are we going to be speaking to the machine and it's going to write for us? Is it going to even read our thoughts? So there's this very interesting questions about what's education and communication going to be in 50 years from now, just given how fast things are evolving. And obviously, thinking back 100 years ago, you used to do math in very different ways than you're doing it now. Um, Similarly, you used to write in a different style and manner than you're doing nowadays. I personally write mostly on my phone. Even when I'm on Zoom calls, I have a hard time writing on my laptop now. I'm writing everything on my phone. Um, it's just I gotta think about it. 10 years ago, I would have told myself, "Are you crazy? Why would you write on your phone?" But it's just a habit because we're all on our phones all day long. So yeah, it's I think that's where the opportunity lies. It's multimodality and how learning will evolve with that. Um, yeah, I mean, I think to the other question, it's always hard to say what I'm not excited because uh, you can also see some things come to life because of AI that weren't exciting before. Um, but yeah, I think having people in the workforce go to take a course somewhere remotely in person with another group of people, it's probably something I don't expect in the future. Think you have learning on the go in your workflow. But yeah.
That's really insightful. I wish I would have had photo math when I was in grade school because math was something that I struggled with so much. And when I learned about photo math in preparing for this episode, I thought, wow, I wish I would have had that tool. I think I would have understood it so much better and felt more motivated to study in general.
Well, I felt the exact same way when we first met for the math because I was already out of school and it would have saved me so many hours of learning math for sure.
And before we end the conversation, we have a couple of quick rapid fire questions for you. The first one being, you played Roland Garros back in 1988.
That was juniors, yeah. I
Juniors.
didn't play the men's event, but
Okay.
but the juniors event is the second week of the men's event, so it's actually at the same site. Yeah.
And I'm curious because when we're recording this episode, Roland Garros is about to start. If you can share with us a couple predictions, who you think may win or who you'd like to see win.
Well, I think um look, I'm probably not supposed to to say who I should be rooting for, but I think it's an amazing group of new generation players who have come to the top. Led by Yannick Sinner and Carlos Alcaraz and Sasha Zverev and others, um, and they're doing an amazing job in just making that transition from the three greatest players of all times, Federer, Nadal, Djokovic, and with many people having the fear that we are going to have a gap where it's going to be boring, where there's not going to be kind of a new big star, and suddenly, right off the bat, you have two guys or three guys just coming so fast and now winning, most of the major tournaments. And by the way, great human beings, promoting the sport extremely well, people loving them, new styles. So that is all super exciting. What's also even more exciting is you start to look further down in terms of younger players, age 18, 19, and then you start to see, oh, there is Fonseca, oh, there is Mensik, oh, there is a bunch of other guys, Draper, who already are pretty much up there. Draper is now ranked number 5 in the world. Fonseca is top 20. Mansik's top 20. Fonseca is also coming close there. So actually, it's amazing. You start to see very young new players coming to the top, and all of them playing amazing tennis. All of them great human beings on the court, off the court. So I'm just in general very excited. And I think Roland Garros is always a tough tournament, probably the toughest because it is clay. Because clay is it just requires so much more. It requires technique, running, endurance, mental, all of that, and matches are longer than in most other surfaces. And yeah, it is just going to be very exciting, I think, to watch the next 2 weeks.
Absolutely. Before recording this episode, we were talking about songs that we listened to in the locker room and getting ready for a match. And I'm curious, Luben, did you have a go to hype song back at UCLA or during your professional career?
A go-to song for sure not. I have a lot of go-to songs, but they tend to change every 2-3 months. But yeah, I was actually funny enough. I started liking Latin music when I was playing and traveling the world for those 2-3 years. And the time Shakira was, one of the up and coming artists. And it's because in the early days she was actually just having songs in Spanish. So
Mm-hmm.
because of that, I started to learn Spanish. I started translating some of the songs into English, and then by the time I was in LA, living in LA for UCLA, it was easy to actually start speaking Spanish because you also hear it there quite a lot. But it's just a funny thing that some of my friends make fun of me for that. But
And I think Rafael Nadal was in one of her music videos at the time.
Gypsy.
right, yeah,
Fellow Latino
that
here,
Yeah,
fellow
yeah,
fan of
yeah.
Shakira. So yeah. If you could go back in time and tell Luben during his first years of VC investor, would you give any message to him?
I tend not to think this way because if I mean, you grow and you learn and you try to do your best. When you're young, you make mistakes, or even at this stage, you always make mistakes, but you try to limit them. You try to learn from the mistakes before and try to always grow as a person. And yeah, it's hard to say if I can go back this and that. Look, I'm always optimistic, forward looking, try to always be approaching things with a positive view, and yeah, learn from the mistakes.
And do you think in 5 years, our educational system and our university higher education system will look the same, or will it be completely different?
I think it will be enhanced. It will evolve because if it doesn't, I think then we are in trouble. I think it's critical because education is becoming increasingly more important now that AI is disrupting the workforce. It's changing jobs much faster than than jobs used to change before. Companies are now able to scale with less people, so it creates a societal problem where people need to get re-educated, need to learn the skills how to work efficiently with AI, and the education system and universities need to adapt much quicker than they have in the past. It used to take so much for curriculum to change within a university, and now they're finding themselves that, again, somebody going through a 3 or 4 year degree graduates and is not able to get into the job because whatever that person just learned is no longer relevant. So the universities now are increasingly also partnering with a lot of the EdTech providers to be able on a short period of time to change and adapt and improve their curriculum and what they can offer to the students. So I do think it needs to be changing faster, and it is probably changing faster. And my hope is that it will.
Wonderful. Well, Luben, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us today, for sharing your transatlantic experience. I'm really excited to see where EdTech is headed, and thank you again for your insights. This has been great.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure and great talking to you both.
Thank you.
Thank you.